In this video, the exercise that I'm going to cover, or variations of similar exercises, is squatting to absolutely shit on your quads. So when we're looking to train our quads, or any muscle in general, you want to spend time in both the lengthen and shorten ranges of motion. And for quads, the leg extensions, they do an amazing job at training our quads in the shortened position. And then squat variations will do a good job in lengthening. So when we're looking at lengthening the quad, what we want to do is get as deep into knee flexion as possible, and this is shown by your hamstring getting close to touching your calves. So I'm going to start with more machine-specific variations. When you're looking to position your feet correctly, generally you're going to want your feet as low as you can go before your heels are lifting off the platform, and that'll be pretty obvious when your feet are too low just because your heels are lifting off. But then also we want to avoid putting our feet too high, as one, the machine might just not let you go low enough to get deep enough into knee flexion where your quads are getting the majority of the stimulus. If the machine lets you get deep enough into your squat where the knee flexion is relatively similar, so let's go there and there. For both of these variations, even though my feet are positioned higher on the one on the right, the ability for us to get into knee flexion is close to the same, so our quads are getting about the same amount of work. But what we're looking for, what happens when our feet get too high, is what is happening for hip flexion, and hip flexion is correlated to the amount of work that we're going to get from our glutes. So I'm going to try and draw these out. So yeah, I'd say that's easy enough to see. So what happens when our feet are too high and we're getting all the way down into the squat is that we're getting deeper into hip flexion, which is this purple line. And the deeper into hip flexion we're getting, the more that we're going to get work out of our glutes. And that isn't inherently bad when doing a squat. But since this video is tailored towards getting the most out of our quads, we're going to want to limit the force production required by the glutes. So what we're going to do is put our feet as low as we can, like I am on the left, so we can get as much knee flexion with as little hip flexion to biceps quads the most. So once you're able to find your feet positioning of how high or low to put them on the platform, the other thing you want to look at is the width. And generally speaking, it's going to be about shoulder width. And the angle that your toes can point, you'll want them, they can point straight out in front of you, and then they can range from pointing straight out in front of you to a little bit out to the side. But whatever angle that you decide to point your toes, your knees need to travel in that same direction. So if you have a relatively narrow stance and your feet are pointed forward, your knees need to be driving forward. And then the more you angle your feet out, the more that your knees need to angle out and follow the toes in that same direction. Some of the things when doing machines is that your lower back needs to stay in contact with that pad the entire time. Once your back leaves the pad, the stimulus from your quads will leave as well. So since our goal is destroying your quads, that back needs to be pushed into that pad the entire time. The majority of the effort for this exercise needs to be driving your feet like hard down into that platform. But a nice quad activation cue is take about 10% of that effort and think about fighting friction of that platform and pushing your feet or your toes like forward. But don't make sure that that's only like a small percentage of your effort. That's just a little bit of an activation cue. So now I'm going to go into free weight squatting and how variations or little tricks will be a little bit different for this compared to machines. So unless you just have like free proportions or god tier ankle mobility, which I'm guessing the majority of you don't have, this will be a prime example of why using wedges is important and why I'm so focused on looking at an ankle when I'm trying to get someone as deep into knee flexion as possible. So when it comes to squatting free weights, the limiting factor for most is dorsiflexion and how far they're able to pull their shins towards their toes. And if this is an issue, we'll have them stand on a wedge so their heel is elevated. And what this does is it mimics having a longer tibia, which range of motion wise makes it a lot easier for most of you to get into knee flexion. And that's why you see a lot of weightlifting shoes. They have that elevated heel in the back, and that helps you just get deeper into your squat. So now we're going to go through what happens when I use a wedge, and my setup is pretty much the exact same, and the different outcomes that occur when we use a wedge. So the first thing that we're looking for is when I'm using this wedge, the distance that I'm able to get, let me draw. Okay, so my knee is able to travel so much further over my toes. There's one compared to more like that maybe. So the distance of my knee traveling over my toe is more, and then what really matters when I'm looking at this is the distance between my knee and then the resistance from this exercise, which is the bar. So there's that distance there, and then when I'm not using the wedge, try and do it the same. Yeah, you should be able to see it there. Regardless of what the drawing is and what you can see, this distance between these 2 points where I'm not using the wedge compared to where I am using the wedge, the distance where I'm using the wedge is a lot greater. And the further the distance is from that joint and where the resistance is, the more load will be placed onto the muscle, even though the weight I'm using is the same. So there's one reason why using a wedge is nice. And then the second reason why using a wedge is nice is for me personally, my ankle mobility is relatively good. But if someone has shitty ankle mobility, let's say their ankle is only able to go from about, their ankle mobility is there, so like their knee is ending like here. So this is the end of their knee. If that's the case, they're not going to be able to get nearly as deep into knee flexion. So I'm going to use this yellow line is where, so this is my knee flexion. Oh, retry. So my knee flexion is about here to there, which is relatively deep. But if someone has just shit ankle mobility, they're probably only going to be able to get to there, and just they're not able to get as deep into knee flexion, so they're not as well able to train their quads. So recapping quickly, what the goal is for when we're trying to get the most out of your quads is knee flexion, knee flexion, knee flexion. Like the deeper that you can get into there, the more work you're going to be getting out of your quads. And if you can limit the amount of hip flexion you're getting, the less work you're going to be getting from your glutes. And again, like that's not, if you're getting a bunch of hip flexion in a squat, that's not inherently bad. But since our goal is to just shit on our quads, limiting that so our quads can do the majority of the work is the way to go. If you are interested in anything else I have to offer in the name of just getting you fucking yacked, every week I put out a newsletter that goes through like an exercise of the week. So this will be included within that newsletter, and then any topic that you guys request. Also within that newsletter provides updates for people following my free programming, which I call progression programming. And in these videos, I have a completely separate video breakdown on this channel of where I go through the goal of the program, how to follow the program correctly to see the most results, and then the specific exercises I chose and how they correlate with the goals of the program. And then I use Google Sheets where you can download it directly onto your phone so you can follow along and track your progress. And then the exercises in the sheet itself are links with video demonstrations to make sure that you're doing the exercises correctly. You can head to my website, evolutionaryaesthetics.com, where I've got a Potent Priorities ebook, and it gives you 4 focus areas: training in the gym, and then movement, which is things related to outside of the gym, sleeping, and nutrition. And these are the 4 things that, whether you are brand new to the gym or I would argue like professional bodybuilders, if these are not the foundations of what you're doing, and they can be like put into different, like you can make your own method of laying out these things, but I've just made it easier for you to look at. If you can make these 4 things cover the basis for what you're doing every single day, that is how you achieve the best results, both within your physique, mental performance, and also just overall doing it in a healthy fashion. That's all I've got for you for this video, so we'll see each other in the next one.